Welcome. This video is documenting the predictions that the US stock market will peak and begin its biggest crash in all of history on August 12th. It is also predicted that one or more of the main US stock indexes will crash 13% in one day on August 18th. US warships, specifically aircraft carriers, will be sunk on December 10th. The Obamas will be back in the White House as president and vice president on January 20th, 2029. The date that this video was posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as does this timestamped email. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. However, I fail to see how you could possibly be skeptical given the post date of the video and the post or the timestamp on this email. I do not have inside connections at Google and Yahoo and all of the other platforms you are watching this video on. That could somehow change the dates. So, in this video, I will explain these reasons for how these predictions are known in advance. However, these predictions are very precise. They aren't vague at all. In truth, I do not need to provide any reasons or explanations for how these predictions are known. And that's because I know the purpose for these predictions. These predictions are from the righteous Christian God of the Bible. But besides proving that the righteous Christian God of the Bible is the true God, these predictions will also prove the controversial things that I'll be saying in this video and the other videos on this channel. These controversial things that are overwhelmingly proven to be the case, true, the fact, and through God's true big picture of patterns, signs, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, and God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections will be proven to be true when these predictions come to pass. There's already in the world an overwhelming amount of evidence regarding the righteous Christian God of the Bible. But I'll say this, the Christian worldview, which will be proven to be true when these predictions come to pass, is an exclusive worldview. And let's be honest, that's why it is the most hated religion in the world. It is because it is not inclusive, which is the mantra of the left. So-called equality and inclusiveness, etc. That's the religion of the left today. It's the opposite of Christianity, which is why the left hates Christianity. Or I should say true Christianity, because of course progressive Christianity isn't Christianity. It is progressive politics with a cross on it. Okay, so these predictions will prove the true worldview, and it'll disprove the worldview that is the dominant worldview in the West today, which is this version of the Indian religion. Call it what you want, the New Age, new spirituality, or collective consciousness, or there's really not even really a name, because the majority of people that have this worldview don't even recognize that it is a worldview, and let alone have thought about it very much. But many also have And this would include yoga and meditation, whatever. This worldview I'm talking about is that God is an impersonal energy. It is the universe itself. And that all of the world's religions are authentic expressions of the truth. They so-called, supposedly, all are different paths up the same mountain that lead to the same peak, etc. This is a worldview in itself, and as such, it is subject to discerning whether or not it is true or not. It is one of the worldviews in the world today, and only one of the worldviews in the world today can be true, or none of them are true, but they certainly cannot all be true. And this arrogance, this self-described moral superiority of this worldview, which is popular in the West today because it's politically correct and because of the culture of multiculturalism and tolerance, etc. I should say intolerance of intolerance. We have this worldview that attempts to incorporate or supposedly incorporates all of the worldviews, but it in fact is a worldview, and it is either true or it isn't. And let's begin to break that down, because this worldview says that God is an impersonal energy and is the universe itself, which is opposed to the worldview that says that God is a personal being and not an impersonal energy, and is not the universe itself, but rather is the creator of the creation. The word holy is Hebrew that means separate from. Separate from is creation. And it is not the creation itself. So you see, these two worldviews are fundamentally opposed to each other, and both cannot be true. Either the world is round or it is flat. It cannot be both. Despite what religious liberals will say, there's no such thing as religious liberalism. All right, so like I said, these predictions will prove the righteous Christian God of the Bible. And I know far, 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 far more than you or anyone how and why these predictions are known in advance. Okay? And so if you are a New Ager or whatever you want to call it, these predictions were not derived from somehow supposedly tapping into the collective consciousness, etc. If you are an Islamist or a quote-unquote Christian and you would like to believe that these predictions were known because I was in contact with a demon, be warned, Jesus said that the unforgivable sin was blaspheming the Holy Spirit. Jesus commanded his disciples to watch for the signs of his return. If you were to ask the average Christian today if they could name one single sign, they wouldn't even understand the question. And they would miss the obvious one in the Bible, the Star of Bethlehem, which preceded the first coming, and the wise men recognized it, just like the wise men who are watching will recognize the signs preceding the second coming. As for, okay, well, let's drop it there. Let's start this video. As you will see, these predictions, or rather these reasons for how this prediction is known, or these predictions are known, are clearly supernatural. No one is creative enough to concoct these reasons in their own imagination. And this will be very clear as I go through them. So let's get started. I'm not sure, but I think this game may mean something. Perhaps the meaning is the 13th inning. So what I am doing is I'm reading notes. I'm reading notations regarding insights as they came that I shared with a friend. And there is no fancy write-up here. I'm just going through the notes that I'll explain and elaborate on the meaning of what I'm communicating to my friend. Okay, so, and again, also the insights, because they are in chronological order, they will build on themselves and lead to a profound climax or climaxes, but do not skip ahead because you will not understand for one thing and you won't appreciate it as well. So, okay, so we have this baseball game that was immediately recognized as being a prophetic sign. This is because of now studying God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 8 years. Insights and profound revelations have been building for a very, very long time, and so it is now possible to recognize immediately when there is something that is a prophetic sign, and the signs are coming at a pace that is similar to metaphorical fire hose. It is barely enough time. There is barely enough time to keep up, let alone document the predictions and furthermore, then make videos. That said, so we have this baseball game. We have the Boston Red Sox, the most important city in God's sports signs, which are themselves extremely important. Sports is something God uses a lot for very good reason. There is so much that God is able to communicate through sports, and it is also pop culture. And so Boston, because it is symbolic of America, the spiritual founding of America with the Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. So I'm not sure, but I think this game may mean something. Perhaps the meaning is the 13th inning. Sure enough, this intuition here was correct, as I will explain. If the Red Sox win the World Series this year, it will be 13 years after they won in the year 13, which was the year of the Boston bombing. The victory parade on the same street was on the same street. Connections to their visit, the team's visit to Obama at the White House, were prophetic. I do not have those connections right now. They would be lost in notes from years ago. Like I said, the volume of prophetic signs is, you have no idea. Unfortunately, and I mean that sincerely, the vast majority of these signs that I'm speaking of are not recognized by anyone else. And I do not want that to be the case. And so I'll do my best. But we have the Boston bombing, obviously. Not obviously, but it is extremely prophetic, the Boston bombing. But we had the victory parade that went down the same street. And the victory parades, first of all, the victory parades themselves in Boston are prophetic, or have been prophetic, or can be a prophetic sign. God has demonstrated this before, even before 2013. The reason is that the duck boats that are used are amphibious vehicles, and in the victory parade, like they do with tourists, they go into the Charles River. The Charles River is where the Puritans arrived in their ships, and it was a parade of ships. So the victory parade with the duck boats in the Charles River is pointing to the spiritual founding of America. This duck boat parade stopped at the finish line on Boylston Street, where the Boston bombing occurred. Just a few months later, the victory parade stopped there to commemorate the tragedy at the Boston Marathon, at the finish line. Incidentally, I was living in Boston at the time, and I was on my way to the downtown. I was living in Cambridge. I was on my way to the downtown when my friend texted me and said, "Don't bother coming." And then where I was actually where the manhunt was. Like, I could hear the sirens. And I think there was orders to stay inside. So anyway, this is one of a number of examples in which I have a real life connection with the actual prophetic sign. It's stunning I have led an unusual life and have lived and traveled all over the place. And during those travels, I ended up in scenarios like this, you could say. Okay, well, so I'm sure that plays a role in my ability to recognize what's going on here in terms of the Red Sox in the year 2013. Because obviously I was in Boston at the time that they won that World Series as well. Okay, well, anyway, you'll take my word for it that the connections to the date that they visited Obama at the White House were prophetic. The number 13 in the Bible is symbolic of the Antichrist. Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham, and Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 13th days of the months. And the two Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13, the second of the two being Barack Obama. Now, as I'll explain in a little bit here, there was another prophetic game after this, also with the Boston Red Sox. In other words, these two games were tied together in this prophetic sign. The following game, they scored 13 runs and gave them a win streak that has put their season record with 13 runs more than their losses. So the story is the Boston Red Sox win streak and how they have, from the beginning of this win streak, risen up from a team that was doing poorly in the season, had, I think, 12 more losses than wins, and now have, with the advent of the 13-run game, the one that follows this game, that was won in the 13th inning, gives them a record of 13 more wins than losses. So that's even more 13s to hint at this connection that I'm describing here, which is this 13 years to the year 13. Now, as I will be elaborating on more as well, we are talking about the prediction for sunken U.S. aircraft carriers and the Boston bombing, which pointed to the Puritans, as I explained already now, when they arrived on 11 ships. They arrived on 11 ships because prior to that, the Pilgrims arrived on the Mayflower to Massachusetts, 101 of them, which also hints at the number 11. Incidentally, this just came to me, 101 is the 26th prime number, and 26 is 13 plus 13. Yep, that's right. That's right, that's relevant. And we are, in fact, through all of this, pointing to the Mayflower as well, the spiritual founding of America, and Plymouth Rock. And rock in the Bible is symbolic of Jesus, and America was founded in Jesus Christ. So, yeah, it was 101 passengers on the Mayflower. The Mayflower crossed the Atlantic from Great Britain, as did the Titanic, which sank, which was a prophetic sign that God was warning America of, as it was man's hubris that declared this ship to be unsinkable. That's why it sank on its maiden voyage. And the newly revealed images in 2023 show a very prominent number 101 serial number on the propeller. The propeller of the Titanic has a giant 101 on it. And that's because the Titanic is a sign that points to the Mayflower with its 101 passengers and its crossing of the Atlantic. That's why the Boston bombing on Patriots' Day in Massachusetts was exactly 101 years to the very day that the Titanic sank, with the number 101 on its propeller. Yes, that's amazing. In other words, that's the prophecy of the Boston bombing, a warning for America, because Boston symbolizes America, hence why the Red Sox and the New England Patriots are so very important in God's signs. Now, the sinking of the Titanic was exactly 47 years after President Abraham Lincoln was shot. Which hints at the 47th presidency, during which ships will be shot at, as in the shooting of Abraham Lincoln, and these ships will include the sinking after it is shot of the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier. Shot by the Iranian regime, which has been in power for 47 years. "47 is the 15th prime number, and the Boston Red Sox win streak, as I will explain in a minute, included a 15-game win streak in a row, tying their prior record when the Red Sox won 15 in a row in 1946, the year that President Trump, the 47th president, was born. There's more to that, which I've explained in another video. Moving on, if the Red Sox, to say that nonchalantly, moving on, what I have just explained is extremely profound. Like, that is something to behold, what you have just heard. It's, what can I say? Words can't describe it. If the Red Sox win the World Series, it will be 8 years after they won in the year 18. And that would hint at 18 and 8, or 188, which is a number that God uses frequently in his signs, as from the Bible, it points to, or rather I should say, the 188th word in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance is the word woe, exclamation mark, used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. And so from the year 18, it is 8 years to this game. But more than that, which I didn't write in this sentence, is that with this win that we're talking about, the Red Sox won 8 games in a row. So they won 8 games in a row 8 years after they won the World Series in the year 18. Whoa, a warning for America, because it's Boston. I have watched the highlights of the game. The game was incredible. The Red Sox tied it up 5 times, including in the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th innings. All right? So, if you don't know baseball, there are 9 innings in a game, and if the game is still tied at the end of the 9th inning, they go into an extra inning, a 10th inning. If it is still tied, they go to another one, an 11th, and so on. What happened here is that their opponents, in this case Chicago, because the Antichrist is from Chicago, were ahead in each of these innings. In the case of the 9th, they were ahead by 1+1 runs, which hints at 9-11, the big warning for America. And in these other innings, the White Sox went up ahead 1 run. And in each case, in each inning, the Red Sox scored an equivalent number of runs to tie the game, to move it into ultimately the 13th inning, in which they won the game. That's incredible. And that just, in my mind, makes the game stand out and makes it for sure a prophetic sign. It's just a question of figuring out what God is communicating at this point. Well, they tied the game 5 times. That's because the game after this, they became the 5th team in history to win 27 out of 30 games. And that date, the date after this game, is exactly 5 times 5 times 5 days before the predicted sinking of the ships, of America's ships, as in Boston, near the Red Sea, as in the Red Sox. And also, by the way, in that win streak included a 5 plus 5 plus 5 game win streak. And again, 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 15. The 15th prime number is 47. The ships are the 47th presidents. And the president, Lincoln, was shot 47 years before the Titanic was sunk. And we're talking about the sinking of the USS Lincoln. You know what, actually, though, Lincoln was the 4 times 4th president. This game was against Chicago. And the Antichrist is the 44th president from Chicago. Chicago was in Illinois. Lincoln was from Illinois. It was 4 plus 4 games. This win against Chicago was their 4th plus 4th game in a row, win in a row, 44th president. The losing pitcher was number 47. Yeah, I should have mentioned that to when I was talking about the 47 years, because, yeah, the losing pitcher of this game was pitcher number 47, who came in the 13th inning, I believe, to lose the game. And, of course, that hints at the 47th president and the Iranian regime that's been in power for 47 years, but it also hints at the 47 years in between the shooting of Lincoln and the sinking of the Titanic, which hints at the sinking of the Lincoln. And like the Titanic, the the aircraft carriers are the large ships, the unsinkable ships, if you will, of the US Navy. All right, now there's a little confusion here because the game, I'm talking about the following game that I haven't described yet, all right? So originally when I wrote this, I got the dates mixed up here, but it doesn't matter because the following game, like I said, was also part of the same sign, and it too was prophetic. So anyway, the game on 8/7, and by the way, 8/7 in itself hints at 8 plus 7 equals 15, which is 5 plus 5 plus 5. And again, this game on 8/7 is exactly 5 times 5 times 5 days before the predicted sinking of the ships. So the game on 8/7 was 2 times 52 days, which hints at the 25/20 days in Bible prophecy that symbolizes the period of the Antichrist and the end times. Okay, so this game with the Red Sox was 2 times 52 days, prophetic 2 times 52 days, after the 47th Red Sox manager. Just now I get it. So I couldn't figure it out before. But so God uses records for signs. And in this game, the Red Sox pitcher made a record, the youngest player to pitch 14 strikeouts in a game. And 2 times 52 is 104 days, which hints at 14. Amazing. Amazing. There's probably more to that. Like if I looked up the player's name, and there may be some more supporting details, but that's enough really. Because this is what I'm describing here was a prophetic sign 2 times 50, 104 days ago with the Red Sox. All right. And we're talking about in this game there being a record. There's no way that there's a record in this game that was achieved that isn't prophetic. We're talking about the Boston Red Sox, and we already know, furthermore, that this game is prophetic. There's for sure a reason why he struck out 14 batters. And this is the reason. Now it's known. But like I say, there may be more details. I'm busy making a video right here. Coincidentally, as I said that, I glanced at the timing of this particular recording, which hit exactly as I looked, 2 minutes and 52 seconds. And I never assert that these personal signs are anything more than just for me. I'm not saying that this is a prophetic sign for you to take note of. I'm just finding it amusing. It's like personal confirmation, if you will. I would never suggest that this is a universal sign that everyone needs to know. But I just thought I would throw that in for you for fun. Now, the game on 8/7, which was 2 times 52 days, again hints at the prophetic 25-20 days in Bible prophecy, which symbolizes the period of the Antichrist. It was this number of days after the 47th Red Sox manager. It's the 47th Red Sox manager. All right? And in the game before, it was number 47 who lost the game. And again, it's the 47 years between the shooting of Lincoln and the Titanic, etc. So we have the 47th manager hints at the 47th president, because the manager is the leader of the team, as in the leader of the nation, the 47th president. Okay, so it was a big story because this manager had guided the team actually to the 2018 World Series. This just occurred to me. This is actually more evidence that what I suggested earlier may in fact happen. It's seemingly more likely than ever, because of this next confirmation, that the Red Sox will in fact win the World Series this year. And because it'll point to the 18 World Series, which this particular manager led the team to win and then was fired at the beginning of the season this year. Which, like I'm explaining, was a major prophetic sign, and I go into more details in other videos. The manager's name is Alex Cora, okay? And he was fired, which was the same day that an assassin tried to fire gunshots at the 47th president. So the 47th Red Sox manager, Alex Cora, was fired on the same day that an assassin tried to fire gunshots at the 47th president. The shooter's name, Cole Allen, hints at Alex Cora and hints at the USS Cole that was bombed in the port of Aden. Cole Allen, USS Cole, port of Aden. And that's in the Red Sea, and we're talking about the Red Sox. Like I said at the beginning of this video, no one is creative enough to concoct these reasons, these explanations that I'm giving in their imagination. This is from God, obviously. And so, this is also, of course, more confirmation of the 47 years between the Lincoln shooting, the firing, the gunshots, and the Titanic. and the sinking of the Titanic, which hints at the sinking of the USS Lincoln by missiles fired by the regime that's been in power for 47 years. With this win, the Red Sox won 8 games in a row, 8 years after they last won the World Series in the year 18, H188, whoa, exclamation mark, which will be the case when the prediction comes to pass that the USS Lincoln will be shot and fired upon and sunk. The 2018 World Series was 29 years after the 1989 World Series earthquake. This is arguably the most important reason for why the Boston Red Sox are prophetic. And furthermore, why the 2018 and their win in the World Series is so extremely prophetic. And as I... Okay, so again, I'm just gonna start again here. The 2018 World Series was 29 years. You know what, by the way, 29 is 9 plus 10 plus 10, which gives us 2 1s and a 9 for a 9/11. And the 1989 World Series earthquake was arguably in the league of 9/11 in terms of a warning sign from God. If you are too young to know about this, this was when the two teams playing in the World Series, San Francisco and Oakland, coincidentally, were across a bridge from each other, across the Bay Bridge. And at the beginning of Game 3, an earthquake struck and the power was knocked out of the ABC Sports broadcast booth. And there was tragedy across the Bay Area. Fires erupted because of broken gas lines in San Francisco. And sections of the Bay Bridge collapsed. Specifically, one section in the middle of the bridge and the viaduct that came onto the bridge. When the viaduct collapsed, it collapsed onto people in cars beneath the segment, the section, who were crushed. 42 people died. In the Bible, the number 42 always occurs in the context of a slaughter. But it's also in the context of the Antichrist, who will be leading a slaughter. What's another parallel, incidentally, though, to 9/11 is God's mercy in both of these signs. Because had the planes struck just a half hour later, there would have been many thousands more deaths. Likewise, because the earthquake struck at the beginning of the World Series game, everyone in the Bay Area had already arrived in front of a TV set and was watching the game. And so, even though it was rush hour, there were barely any people on the highways. And there would have been more deaths had that been the case. Now, the earthquake, the earthquake struck at the beginning of Game 3, which hints at the Trinity. And a bridge is symbolism in this context of the bridge between man and God, which is Christ. This is why the earthquake was 6.9 in magnitude, because in the most central prophecy in the Bible, the Christ arrives after 69 weeks, hence the 6.9 earthquake. And the earthquake was centered in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 10 miles from Santa Cruz, California, which is Spanish for Holy Cross. It was the I-80 that collapsed. 80 is 40 plus 40. The 44th president is the Antichrist. And on, actually. So that's the 1989 World Series earthquake. Now, Jesus Christ mentioned to his disciples when he was asked for the signs to look for of his return, earthquake signs. This is quite the earthquake sign. In fact, I'm arguing that, well, it is one of the, we'll just call it one of the most important earthquake signs, all right? We'll just leave it at that. I was tempted to make it, but there's no need to go there and say it's the most important earthquake sign. We'll just call it one of the most, as you will see as I will now explain. Because the 2018 World Series was extremely prophetic. There were very profound prophetic signs at the beginnings, or rather in each of the first 4 games of that World Series, culminating with the Game 4 signs that included a series of the number 4. Just briefly, Trump, God's trumpet, was in the news because of his trumpeting on Twitter, his displeasure or criticism for the manager's decision to prematurely pull their pitcher, number 44, when the Dodgers had a 4-0 lead, which was then blown after they pulled the pitcher, whose name was Rich Hill, and pitchers on the pitching mound symbolized the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, the 44th president. Pitcher number 44 was pulled after the 4-0 lead, which was then subsequently blown, which Trump had criticized to highlight it being a prophetic sign. And Rich Hill, that was the same day as the mass shooting in which 4 police officers were wounded in the rich, affluent neighborhood of Squirrel Hill, when the Tree of Life Synagogue was shot up. In Pittsburgh, which is 40 plus 40 miles outside of where the plane crashed on 9/11, the 4th plane hijacked that had 44 people on board and crashed at a 40-degree angle, engendering a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, the city of bridges. Hence the connection to the bridge 29 years earlier in the 1989 World Series earthquake. By the way, that just came to me. And I'm so glad I went into detail, because after all these years, that never connected. The shooting was in the city of Bridges, and it connected with Rich Hill in the game, which connects to the bridge in the 1989 World Series earthquake. This always happens, but to have this, like when I go through the information, information again, there's always new revelations, but to have a new revelation like this regarding the 1989 World Series earthquake, which has been thought about for years, is astounding. Yeah. Oh, and all the 4s, by the way, is also the name Jesus is equal to 444 in English gematria. And again, it was game 4 and pitcher number 44, 4 police officers wounded, 4-0 lead blown. And the 4-0 lead blown was exactly 40 weeks after the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem sign. In context of Jesus mentioning earthquakes regarding the signs to look for, he also mentioned birth pains, and the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. That's why we have the Antichrist Star of Bethlehem sign, which was the humanity star. I'm not going to explain it. Was exactly 40 weeks before the 4-0 lead was blown. And also this game 4, in which player number 44 was pulled from the game, losing the 4-0 lead, was exactly 444 days after the Revelation 12 sign in the night sky that depicted the rapture. Well, okay. And actually, that's just scratching the surface. But anyway, back to what I was saying. We had all of these signs in the beginnings of these, not just the beginnings, but these first 4 games of the 2018 World Series. And that's because of its significance being 29 years after the 1989 World Series earthquake. Now, why is that relevant, besides it being 9 plus 10 plus 10, 29 years? That's because 2018 was 1989 years after Jesus began the age of fishing for men in 29 AD. And that's a fact. The Gospel of Luke tells us that his ministry began in the 15th year of Tiberius, and we know that Tiberius began his reign in 14 AD. So don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The ministry of fishing for men began in 29 AD. Now, furthermore, what I'm explaining proves this beyond a doubt. But there's no need to prove it because the gospel is clear. So don't let anyone tell you anything else. And speaking of 4, Jesus observed 4 Passovers and was crucified on the 4th one, which means there's no dispute regarding Jesus being crucified in the year 32 AD. Despite those that want to make it 30 or 33, or for whatever reason. Okay, well, that's not, I could prove that with other things too, but there's no need because what I'm explaining right here proves the matter. Well, I'll tell you this, for those that really want to look into it, if we look at the Daniel chapter 9 prophecy, it's very straightforward and clear that there is required there be 5,888 moons. Okay? Because Passover is a moon, a full moon. So there needs to be 5,888 of them. It's clear. And that can only be 32 AD. Besides everything else, there's so many other reasons for why 32 AD, but it can only be 32 AD because 30, 31, and 33 AD do not have an extra month of Adar. And there needs to be an extra month of Adar for there to be 5,888 moons. Incidentally, the name Jesus is equal to 888. The name Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria, the language the Bible is written in. So anyway, but like I'm saying, this proves it also. Because Jesus and his 12 disciples were a total of 13 men that began the age of fishing for men in 29 AD. The Red Sox won this game I'm talking about with a 12th run in the 13th inning, as in 12 disciples for 13 men. In Jesus' last miracle, 153 fish were caught in the net, which symbolized the end of the age of fishing for men, which incidentally is why the event is said to have occurred 200 cubits from shore, which hints at the 2,000 years of the age of fishing for men. But 153 times 13, which is the equation for the age of fishing for men that began with 13 men, and fish is symbolized by 153, which gives us the equation of 13 times 153 is equal to 1989. And that is why the 1989 World Series earthquake was in 1989. You know, I should emphasize it was the 1989 World Series earthquake. Furthermore, the 9 plus 10 plus 10 years from which hints at the World Trade Center towers in the world's city, New York. Anyway, this is the equation, 13 times 53, that represents the age of fishing for men, 1989, 29 AD, which is when the age of fishing for men began, plus 13 times 153 years gives us 2018. And that's why the 2018 Boston Red Sox World Series was so extremely prophetic. You know what? How could I have forgotten? This was the second, no. The Super Bowl after this was a second in a row championship in which the two teams were Boston and Los Angeles. So, but in this 2018 World Series, the two teams playing were Boston and Los Angeles. Two teams, Boston and Los Angeles. On 9/11, the two planes that struck the two towers were flights from Boston to Los Angeles. And that's why also the two championships in a row, because the Super Bowl that followed this World Series was also between Boston and Los Angeles. More confirmation for this 9 plus 10 plus 10 years. Also, the prophetic signs on the day of Game 1 of this World Series included a plane crash on Highway 101 in California. A vintage World War II plane crashed onto Highway 101, as in two planes. The first of which was Flight 11, as in Highway 101, which had a crew of 11 people and flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state, and New York City is made up of 11 letters. All of this because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out, as in last chance warning for America to repent and turn back to God, the 9/11 events. Also, Flight 11 departed Boston, where the 11 ship flotilla arrived, led by John Winthrop, who lived his life on Governor's Island, which is now Logan Airport, where Flight 11 departed. Why did God point to John Winthrop? Because before the Puritans disembarked their ships, their 11 ships, Winthrop read a speech, a sermon derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, which describes 9/11. The prophecy describes, for example, a judgment on the people, on the nation of Israel, and a description of people walking on iron under a bronze sky. And describes an eagle swooping down. On one of the planes was a giant eagle painted onto the tail of the plane. The eagle was swooping down. Why did God point to Deuteronomy chapter 28? This regards the sermon that Moses gave to the Israelites before they crossed into the Promised Land. The Puritans saw their crossing of the Atlantic and their escape of the King of England as analogous to the Israelites' escape of the King of Egypt and crossing the Jordan River and the Red Sea, speaking of Red Sox, into the Promised Land. The New World was the Promised Land for the Puritans. And in this chapter of Deuteronomy is a description of God's promises of blessings or curses to the nation depending on whether or not they obey or not his commandments. Incidentally, the 11-ship flotilla in Deuteronomy 28, therefore Flight 11, hints at the date 1128, when it is predicted that Paul Simon, who has a hit song, America, will slip and fall and injure his head. But that's another subject. I just wanted to just throw that in there. Speaking of the 11th hour going into the 12th hour, that was the score of the game. The score was tied 11-11 and then went into the 12th run, giving us an 11th hour into the 12th hour symbolism. In the 13th inning, which symbolizes America, which was founded with 13 colonies after the revolution that began in Boston. With the Boston Massacre. And then the Boston Tea Party. So you can see the number 13 here being very important for specifically the Boston Red Sox. Because again, the Boston Red Sox are part of this equation that God has used to demonstrate the end of the age of fishing for men. And the number 13 is relevant to Boston because of the 13 colonies and the revolution that began in Boston. The age of fishing for men involved America as God's nation of Christian disciples that he used to spread the gospel around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. America is an Israel. It is God's Gentile nation, his chosen nation. But like the Israelites, the judgment on a people or nation is commensurate with the amount of blessings and light that was received. So the win in the 13th inning in Boston was 13 years after they won the World Series in the year 13, the same year as the Boston bombing. But as I'm going to get at in a second, the following day they won, or rather scored 13 runs to give their season record 13 more wins than losses. And that game was against Oakland, which is where the 1989 World Series earthquake occurred, when the power was knocked out in the broadcast booth in Oakland. The Red Sox scored 12 runs against Chicago to win their 8th game in a row. This game on 8/6 is exactly 128 weeks before Michelle and Barack Obama, who are from Chicago, are predicted to return to the White House on January 20th, 2029. Okay, this is amazing. They're both from Chicago. This game had the Red Sox score 12 runs for their 8th game in a row, win in a row. Okay, that hints at 128. This game is exactly 128 weeks before it is predicted that Michelle and Barack Obama will return to the White House. That's one of the main predictions here in the title, right? What's amazing is that Barack and Michelle Obama were born exactly 128 weeks apart. Why is that? That is because of G128 in Strong's Greek Concordance, which is the word for the Ethiopian, who in the story was the servant of the Queen of Egypt, Queen Candace. Michelle Obama will become the Queen of America. Barack Obama was born in East Africa in southwest Kenya, right near Ethiopia. And this is why this connection. Because Barack Obama was born in southwest Kenya. And that's a fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. If you thought so, it's because you were susceptible to the brainwashing and the propaganda of the left that did not do their job because they run the media. Or rather, I should say, they used to. But even at that time, they didn't, because conservatives were talking on talk radio, which the left wanted to shut down. But they ran the mainstream media, and that's why you never heard the truth about where Barack Obama was born. It was a lie, and they were not doing their job in vetting Barack Obama because why? They didn't want to. Why? Because they wanted a black president who was a Democrat. Why? To pat themselves on the back, to lift them up, to confirm their sense of moral superiority to conservatives, to confirm for them that their religion is morally superior, their religion being politics. Progressive politics has become for them religion and worship of the state, but more specifically, their politics. Because as Chesterton said, when one ceases to believe in God and worship God, they do not worship nothing, they worship anything, including politics. Anyway, that's another subject. But the point is that the question is, well, why did the left not do its job? And why did the left and the Democrats in America and here's the key, why did they not want them to do their job? They wanted the lie. They loved it. They loved the lie. They did not want to know the truth. And when a conservative would tell them the truth, how dare they? Those racist blah, blah, blah. Because for them to be morally superior, they have to believe that conservatives are racist and all kinds of other things. Because they need to believe in their religion, which gives them meaning in life. And people need meaning in life. And that's why people will believe things that contradict truth in order to maintain their worldview. There's a term for this even in psychology, belief perseverance. When someone encounters information that contradicts their worldview, they block it out. And in this case, they vilify those who are telling them the truth. Why? Because they need to maintain their sense of moral superiority from their politics, which makes those that don't believe their religion evil. It's like not just wrong, something to disagree with. They're bad, evil people. Because they disagree with their progressive beliefs. And here we have a problem from which there is no solution. We have a civil war going on, but in truth, it's a religious war. And the two sides cannot live with each other. Well, specifically, the left cannot tolerate anything that is heresy for them. But because they don't have a grounding in the God of the Bible, they are susceptible, and they will do like all other utopian political movements have done in the past, which is commit genocide. But now I'm really jumping ahead. But that's what's coming. And the truth is that they loved the lies about Barack Obama because it was also spiritual. But from the Christian perspective of spiritual, meaning what it really was about, although not conscious, was rebellion against the God of the Bible. The left is in complete rebellion against the God of the Bible. They don't know it, but they are on their way to hell. And so God is, in fact, going to take care of this problem with these two halves of America that can no longer live with each other. But before we get there, there's going to be a lot of trials and perseverance testing for God's saints. This is all part of the plan as well. That God uses evil to grow his crop, if you will, of his people through trial and testing. And so that's also the role that these progressives play in this final period. But after their role is done, after they're finished serving Satan, they will not be rewarded. They will be thrown into the lake of fire and die the second death after they've paid the price for their sins, which they refuse to repent for. But unlike what most evangelicals will tell you, people do not get tortured forever in hell. There's a second death for these people. Anyway, the reason why the Antichrist is Barack Obama is because he is the leader of the progressive politics, in which the followers love lies. They love them. They love the lies. And it's all spiritual. Okay? And so anyway, I think I mentioned this at the beginning. If I haven't, the reason why God has given me a voice through these predictions is to prove these controversial things. Every single one of them. I want to be clear. Every single controversial thing that I am saying in these videos is the reason for the predictions. And I know far, far better than you or anyone the reason and purpose for these predictions that are from God. And it's not just that Barack Obama is the Antichrist, but everything else that I've said as well, including him having been born in southwest Kenya. All right. The Red Sox blew out. Okay, so here's the other game that I mentioned. So the following day on 8/7, the Red Sox blew out Oakland 13-1. 13 times 1 equals 13, giving the team 13 more wins than losses. And that is the story of this year's Red Sox, their season record and their turnaround. In fact, they've broken records in that sense too. They're the first team, I think, in history. I think this is I just read it, but I forgot. If I'm not mistaken, they're the first team to come from a record that had 14 or maybe 12 more losses than wins to then having 13 more wins than losses. for example. Now, so the 1989 World Series earthquake was in Oakland, making the prior analysis even more valid. And what is that analysis? The number 13. What does that mean? This equation is true, which means that the 2018 World Series hinted at the second coming. All right. Now, if you want, I'll just add this. The 100, well, you know what? I'll add this first, actually. 153 is 9 times 17, and that's because the Antichrist was president from 09 until 17, or vice versa. And also, the 153 fish that were caught 200 cubits from shore hints at the 2,000 years. But when we add 2,000 years to 32 AD, we get 2032. But if it's including the year 32, we get 2031. And that is the year of the second coming, per God's signs, which will be proven per God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, which will be proven to be true when these predictions come to pass. Now, the Red Sox broke the curse of the Bambino in the year 04 by sweeping St. Louis in 4 games under a blood moon lunar eclipse, and also winning 4 playoff games in a row against New York. Okay, so the curse was that they traded the Bambino to New York. And then in this season, after 86 years, they hadn't won the World Series. And that's why, by the way, the signs began on the date 8/6 here. These 2 games, the first one of the 2 was on the date 8/6. It hinted at the 86 years, but also the 1986 Red Sox were extremely prophetic too, when they lost the World Series to New York, but that's another subject too. And I'm sure it ties into this. I just haven't had time to look into it. I apologize. But back to what I was saying, the Red Sox this year, they had lost the first 3 games of this series, but then won the final 4 to win the series against New York, breaking the curse of the Bambino, then going on to the World Series, and then sweeping the St. Louis team 4-0 in the year 04. And that final game in which the World Series was won, that broke the curse of the Bambino, was under a blood moon lunar eclipse. One of only 2 championship games in U.S. history that were under a blood moon lunar eclipse. The other one also involving Boston with the Patriots in the AFC Championship game. This blood moon lunar eclipse in St. Louis rose above the stadium over the Gateway Arch, the St. Louis Gateway Arch. In the Bible, judgment symbolically begins at the gate. But this Gateway Arch is also symbolic of a portal, and the end times will be a collision between the demonic realm and the earthly realm, and on and on. Those who take the mark of the Antichrist will become demonically possessed, but I'm going off subject. Now, the Red Sox win in the year 13 was also prophetic. So we had the prophetic win in 04 and the prophetic win in 13. 4 times 13 is this equation that God repeats in his signs, these pairings of 4 and 13, because 4 and 13 times 13 equals 52, which is the equivalent of ship in simple English gematria. And again, I explained the 13 World Series hinted at the sinking of the ship Titanic, and how all of this points to the coming prediction for the sinking of the U.S. warships this December. With their win on 8/7, the Red Sox became the 5th team in history to win 27 out of 30 games. The 27 wins includes 5 + 5 + 5 wins in a row. The 5th team to achieve this on 8/7, and 8/7 hints at 8 + 7 = 15 = 5 + 5 + 5. is 5 times 5 times 5 days before the predicted destruction of U.S. ships, as in the Boston Puritans ships. When America's, as in Boston, winning streak will come to an end. That's right. That's why the 15-game win streak came to an end, because it hints at America's winning streak coming to an end. And again, the 15th prime number is 47. The ships will be the 47th presidents, and the regime has been in power for 47 years. The number 13 is the 6th prime number. Boston's, as in America's, win in the 6th prime number inning on the 6th of the month is 6 days before the predicted peak of the stock market on the 6th plus 6th day of the month. That'll also be the day of the eclipse that will hint at the hantavirus ship, or vice versa, which I explained in the other video. On 8-7, and again, 8 plus 7 equals 15 equals 5 plus 5 plus 5, Boston became the 5th team to win 27 out of 30 games, and this streak included 5 plus 5 plus 5 wins in a row. This day is 5 days before the predicted peak of the stock market, the U.S. stock market, as in Boston, on 8-12. And then this peak, after this peak, the stock market will begin its biggest crash in all of history, the destruction of America. And America's military power is dependent on its economic power, which is symbolized by the stock market. On Wall Street, which is symbolism for the walls of security collapsing in God's judgment from the Bible. On 8-6 in Boston, as in America, Boston scored a 12th run to win in the 13th inning. This is 12 days before it is predicted that the U.S. stock market will lose 13% in one day on August 18th. That's amazing. 12 runs, 13th inning, 12 days to the predicted 13% loss in one day. The win in the 13th inning and the blowout the following day, in which the Red Sox scored 13 runs to give the team 13 more wins than losses, which again is the main story of the Red Sox, how they turned their losing record around, points to the Red Sox World Series win 13 years ago in the year 13. The prophetic sign in the 13 World Series win was the Duck Boat Victory Parade down Boylston Avenue, where it stopped at the finish line of the Boston Marathon to commemorate the Boston bombing that occurred a few months prior. The duck boat parades in Boston, as in America, are prophetic because they go into the Charles River, where John Winthrop and the Puritans arrived in 11 ships. Puritans on the 11 ships chose Boston because of the 101 passengers who arrived on the Mayflower who chose Massachusetts, which is not what they originally intended to do, which is another story. The Boston bombing on Patriots' Day in Massachusetts was exactly 101 years after the Titanic sank on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic. Images of the wreck in 2023 revealed the large number 101 on the propeller of the Titanic. The Titanic sank exactly 47 years after President Lincoln was shot, which hints at the prediction that the 47th president's ships will be sunk, including the USS Abraham Lincoln, after they are shot. The aircraft carrier named after President Lincoln will be shot by the Iranian regime that has been in power for 47 years. One more sign here discovered today involving the Red Sox. Okay, now we had the Red Sox game on 8-6, 8-7. Well, 8-8 was when their 9-game winning streak came to an end. Okay, now in this game, there was another record, and God uses records in general for signs. The 111th consecutive game record. Okay, so the record is a 111 games in a row by a shortstop without committing an error. Okay, so this is a record for shortstops specifically, and it's a record 111 games in a row without committing an error. The 111th consecutive game record was made 11 days after Fauci's 111 pleas. He pleaded the Fifth Amendment 111 times at his hearing in Congress, for which he was ruled in contempt of Congress. He pleaded 111 times, and this was 11 days before the 111th consecutive game record in Boston. The game was in Boston, as in America, when the Red Sox's 9-game win streak ended. 11 days, 9-game win streak, 11-11, 11-11, right? That's hinting at 9/11. When Flight 11 with a crew of 11 flew to the Twin Towers, looked like a giant 11 in the 11th state. Anyway, 8-8, the day of this record, is the 4 times 44th prime number of days before June 23rd, 2029, when it is predicted that the Antichrist will enact a new law regarding the VACCINE and the upcoming pandemic. The law is hinted at with the Fifth Amendment law, which Fauci tried to use. He wasn't entitled to use it because he had already received a pardon. So there's nothing that he could have said that could have incriminated him. Yet he chose to use the Fifth Amendment, which didn't apply to him, because nothing he could say could incriminate him. He was given a blanket pardon. So why did he use the Fifth Amendment? Well, because he has lots to hide. And how do we know? Because we now have his diaries. So for those that were on the left, that were loving the lies and the brainwashing because they wanted to feel morally superior to conservatives, because it was part of the culture war and the Civil War, and because they used the VACCINE, and the MASKs unknowingly, unconsciously, as a weapon against their enemies, true conservatives and true Christians. If you loved the lies, now you know. And believe me, God had it that Fauci wrote a diary in the first place for you to learn the truth. This isn't an accident that this main character of the lies wrote a diary which would come out later after things had settled down, but prior to the big escalation and climax of the age involving what Fauci was lying about, giving you an opportunity to now repent, because the truth is now out there. I mean, it was always out there, but now it's in your face. We have the Fauci diaries in which he talks about all of the lies. But you know what? You still won't look into it. You still will not even consider what I'm saying right now. Why? Because it's coming from a conservative, the enemy of your religion. and your movement and your tribe. You will still not even consider the Fauci diaries. You won't even look into it. Perhaps this prediction will cause you and force you to look into it because you wouldn't otherwise. And that's the purpose of this prediction, is to try to wake you up to the truth, which is that everything the left believes is a lie. I mean, today, unlike prior civil wars, like the Civil War, for example, in the 1800s, or the Revolutionary War, back then, the two sides had things that they agreed upon. They had common values. They had shared Judeo-Christian values. Today, these two sides agree on absolutely nothing of importance. And that's because they no longer share the same values. A new religion has emerged that's replaced Christianity for the people on the left. And one's politics flow downstream from one's worldview and religion. And that's why people today agree on absolutely nothing. But from the Christian perspective, from the Christian worldview, it's even deeper. Because the truth is, if the Christian worldview is true, they are in rebellion against Satan. Against God, and are in alignment with the spirit of Satan. Okay, that's the truth. And when this prediction comes to pass, it'll prove this. So you can either still ignore it and look into the Fauci diaries and everything else that other conservatives have been trying to tell you for years, which you dismissed because you felt you were better than them, but you aren't. And you aren't smarter than them. It's no offense, but it's actually the opposite. A liberal is simply someone who hasn't heard the conservative point of view on a subject. And that's the thing. Conservatives know the liberal point of view because it's the mainstream. But liberals do not know, and because it's their nature and the mindset of a liberal to be more emotional than reasonable or rational, that's the nature, which is why, for example, more women, especially single women, are Democrats than Republicans and vice versa. Part of this civil war is a war between men and women in our society today. And sorry, but women in general don't think as clearly as men. They're more emotional by nature, which is why the left politics are the politics of emotion. Now, so we have this prophetic sign, Trump, God's trumpet, that he uses to trumpet prophetic signs. The name Trump is equal to 88 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. And Donald J. Trump is equal to 888 in English gematria. So October 5th, 2017 was when Trump said to the media cryptically that this is the quiet before the storm, when he had a gala with members of the military. And that day is 8 years, 8 months, 8 weeks, and 8 days before the date 8/8. When, incidentally, Lionel Messi, the soccer player's father, died at the age of 88. Messi hints at anti-Messiah. And also Messiah. The anti-Messiah is the 44th president, and that's why this sign on 8/8 with this win streak that connects with Fauci's plea, is 4 times the 44th prime number of days to the predicted 44th president enacting a new law regarding the VACCINE. Okay, the shortstop error record hints at the mark of the Antichrist, the VACCINE, which taking it is a massive error. The 9-game win streak and 111-game no errors streak, because again, this was the day that the 9-game win streak ended as well, right? 11 days after the Fauci plea. So the Boston, as in America's 9-game win streak and the 111-game no errors streak, which was involved in the game against Boston, was 11 days after Fauci used the law 111 times, which hinted at Revelation 9:11, which is in the 5th trumpet of judgment. I should say trumpet. And the shortstop wears number 5, which confirms that we are talking about the 5th trumpet and Revelation 9:11, which describes the coming demonic possession of people who take the mark of the Antichrist, the SHOT, the VACCINE. And with that, this video is finished. God bless. After I stopped recording there, it occurred to me, for some reason, that I didn't really finish describing the prophetic sign that was the plane crash on the Highway 101 on the day of Game 1 of the 2018 World Series. As I was talking about earlier, this prophetic 2018 World Series was extremely important and had prophetic signs in the first 4 games. Well, Game 1 was really quite something because, first of all, prior to the beginning of the game, we had an uncanny double rainbow over Fenway Park in Boston where the game was about to be played. In the Bible, the rainbow is a sign of God's judgment. That rainbow occurred at the same time as the vintage World War II plane crashed on Highway 101 in Los Angeles. And the World Series was between Boston and Los Angeles, which are the 2 cities that the flights were from and to destined for on 9/11. At the same time as the World War II vintage plane crashed onto Highway 101, the strongest ever windstorm hit U.S. territory, which were U.S. Pacific Islands, with Hurricane U2, which is Noah's flood symbolism. Those islands were won during World War II with airplanes. And now we can know that all this is pointing to the destruction of aircraft carriers. That's right. No wonder I had a feeling I needed to elaborate some more, because it just came to me as I was talking about it. The Pacific Islands were won with aircraft carriers in World War II, which is why the World War II plane crashed on 101 in Los Angeles on the day Los Angeles played Boston, on the day of the rainbow over the Fenway Park, which is flood symbolism, as is the Hurricane U2 or Typhoon U2 over the Pacific Islands. Stunning. Following that, Game 2 was a 7-minute power outage. In the broadcast booth of the Boston Red Sox radio broadcast. That's astounding. And it also coincidentally occurred during the 7th inning when Boston was staging its big comeback rally to win the game. So if you were listening to the broadcast on the radio, you missed the most important part of the game because of the broadcast power outage. And that hinted at the power outage in the 1989 World Series earthquake. But because it was 7 minutes, it was flood symbolism. Because prior to the flood, there was a warning of 7 days for Noah to load the ark. The ship, as in the U.S. warships, as in the ships in the Pacific that won the Pacific Islands. Another thing about the Game 1 was that the national anthem was sung by Massachusetts resident James Taylor, the famous 1970s singer James Taylor, which is uncanny because the opening of the broadcast for ABC of the 1989 Game 3 World Series game was opened with a song by James Taylor. That's right. And the song was Hello Again, or Hello Old Friend, which hinted at the return, the homecoming of Jesus Christ at the end of the age of fishing for men, which is again what the 2018 World Series was pointing to, as well as the 1989 World Series, as I explained. Hello, Old Friend. That song was then followed by James Earl Jones reading a poem written by the 7th Commissioner of Baseball about baseball being a metaphor for a homecoming. And then right after that, the broadcasters, including Al Michaels, were going over the highlights from the prior 2 games and the game the night before. And at the moment that the power went out, player number 33 was crossing home plate, as in the homecoming, because that's what the baseball metaphor was. Going around the bases, coming around into home plate is like a homecoming. James Earl Jones, that same year, starred in the most iconic baseball movie ever made, in which he gave a soliloquy, a monologue about how America could be great again. That movie is about the 1919 Black Sox, which led to the first commissioner of baseball taking power exactly and giving complete control over complete authority over every person in baseball. Like the Antichrist will have complete authority and control over every person in America. And that day he came to power was 666 days exactly after the 6+6+6th Amendment was ratified, which restricted the buying and selling of alcohol, which is hinting at the coming restriction on buying and selling food to only the quote-unquote good citizens who take the VACCINE. But prior to that moment, this moment in history, when the power went out in the broadcast booth, the ball had been hit into the outfield off the wall, right next to the big number 330, as in for 330 feet marker on the wall. And then player number 33 scored off that hit at home plate. And that's right when the power went out, we get a close-up visual of the player with a number 33 on it on the front of his jersey. And a lot of baseball jerseys don't have the number on the front, but the Oakland A's did. So we see the big 33. Why is that? And it just came to me now, and I'm so glad I went into this because, like I said, always new things come up when I go through the information again. And I had a nudge to start talking again. The reason for the 33 at the homecoming plate at that moment is because it hints at the third of ships that are destroyed in Revelation chapter 8. See, I think I've explained this, maybe not in this video. There are those that say that America isn't in Bible prophecy, but they couldn't be more wrong. And in Revelation chapter 8, the mention of quote unquote, a third of the ships were destroyed is symbolic of the destruction of America. And 33 and 330 feet hint at a third, 33%. And the bridge that collapsed because of the earthquake was the I-80 bridge, under which went past ships. Ships pass under the I-80 bridge. I-80 hints at Revelation 8. And a third of the ships, as in player number 33 at home plate, when the power went out at the moment of the earthquake. Wow. Well, I already explained the signs on game 4. Game 3 was the longest ever World Series game. It went into the 6th plus 6th plus 6th inning and was won dramatically with a home run by player number 13. Again, the whole point of 1989 is that it is 13 times 153. Like I explained earlier. And that was a prophetic sign because he was the Cinderella man. He had a Cinderella story, a rags to riches story. He was in the minor leagues. He was not doing good. And then he rose up and became, after coming out of the bottom dregs of society, if you will, like the movie Cinderella, he rose up and then became the star player that ended this long dramatic game with the home run. So it was a Cinderella story. It was a rags to riches story. But not only that, the game went past midnight, which is the Cinderella story. Which is a hint at God's faithful being raptured and then attending the wedding banquet. So, also, prior to the first game and second game, no, there was a rainbow prior to the game 2 as well. So that game 2 that had the 7-minute power outage that hinted at the 7 days before the flood, there was a rainbow before the beginning of that game as well. But there was also a prophetic rainbow at the beginning of game 1. I think it was it was game 1 of the 2013 World Series as well, which ties those two World Series together, which, as I'm saying, if the Red Sox do win the World Series this year, as I explained at the beginning of the video, will tie back to each of those two World Series, the 2018 and 2013 World Series. All right, I think that's it. God bless. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. and therefore it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.